right, Carol Vorderman has stood down, or was she pushed? Reading between the lines at the BBC, they've got their new social media guidelines, and we're asking this morning, is it time that Gary Lineker had a little think and also went?
Well, never far from controversy, Lineker was suspended earlier this year after he criticised the language used by ministers when discussing the government's asylum policy.
Of late, however, he has taken to reposting tweets rather than commenting on them specifically, although I did spot one, I think just this last weekend, criticising the use of the word hate marches, saying that people protesting for peace and in favour of children who are being bombed is not a hate march. So he's not really shied from getting stuck in with the politics there.
No, but it's just that line, and whether you think he's right or think he's wrong is almost irrelevant. Same with Carol Vorderman. It's whether you think it's appropriate for someone who has a very big platform to be, rallying support for a political party or against a political party or whatever it might be. Let's talk to Chief Executive of the Freedom Association, Andrew Allison, and journalist Julie Cook. Good to see you both. The Freedom Association, Andrew, do you think they should have freedom to say what they want?
No, they shouldn't. It's because of the way that the BBC is funded. We all have to pay a tax to watch live television, and that goes to fund the BBC. And I remember a friend of mine who used to be a presenter in BBC local radio said to me, when it comes to tweeting, he would ask, would I say that on my show? And if it broke BBC editorial guidelines, he wouldn't even tweet it. And I think this is the important thing. BBC presenters are not allowed just to express themselves. In the case of Carol Vorderman, she has been particularly nasty about the government as well. So I think I'm pleased that Carol Vorderman's gone, but I also think that Gary Lineker really needs to think about his role at the corporation.
Julie, do you accept that then? If you want to work and broadcast on the state broadcaster because of the way it's funded, you have to accept a slightly different role when it comes to your own views?
Do you know, if you'd asked me that sort of 20 years ago, I would have said yes. But I think we're living in fairyland if we think the BBC is impartial anymore. It's like saying you believe in unicorns. It really isn't an impartial organisation anymore. I think it's right that we need to hold them to account because we all have to pay a fee. But I don't think it is the impartial organisation it once professed to be. Now, I don't agree with anything Gary Lineker says or Carol Vorderman. They're not my cup of tea, and I think they're, champagne socialists. However, I think it's dangerous to call for sackings every 5 minutes when someone expresses an opinion, when really and truly the BBC, I don't think it is an impartial organisation anymore. I don't think anyone can say it is.
But you've got to be careful, Julie, haven't you? I mean, in the sense that we're not funded by the taxpayer, and yet I wouldn't just tweet whatever I thought on Twitter. I mean, I just wouldn't, because you're going to upset people.
Yeah, I agree. As I say, I don't actually like anything that man tweets. I'm talking from a free speech point of view, which I think we're all champions of, particularly at GB News. I just think that if every time someone expresses an opinion, there is call for a sacking, I think it's a dangerous precedent that then can filter down into other organisations. And let's not forget, the social media has become an unstoppable train. It's not like 20 years ago where if you said something verbally, maybe 30 or 40 people heard it. Social media is an unstoppable, awful part of many of our lives. And I think the very nature of being a public figure and of having a social media platform, everything you say is going to be analysed. And it's very difficult to go back to those times where people could be impartial.
I'm going to the language that Carol Vorderman used when she was talking about the decision yesterday. She said that she was not prepared to lose her voice. Andrew, it was really interesting in the wake of... was he sacked or was he forced out for a little while, Gary Lineker, when Match of the Day was suspended? Yes. There was a huge backlash in support of Gary Lineker, which has created this huge dilemma for the BBC. Do you think you're in tune with what the general public, with what BBC viewers want? Because, he certainly has a level of popularity, does Gary Lineker?
I think that the vast majority of viewers and licence fee payers do want the BBC to be impartial. I do take the point that it's not really very impartial any longer, but it should be. And if it wants to employ presenters who want to speak their mind, want to enter into party politics on social media or in general, then it really needs to look at the way that it's funded, because you can't have it both ways. At least that's my opinion. But I do take your point also on Gary Lineker. There was a little bit of a backlash. But also, I still think that Match of the Day will continue if Gary Lineker was presenting it or not. Match of the Day is an institution in this country, and it doesn't revolve around just one presenter.
I'll tell you what struck me, Julie. You were saying, you don't agree with people being sacked because of what they've said, but in some respects, this isn't about being sacked, is it? I mean, in relation to Gary Lineker, it's about saying the BBC needs to tighten its guidelines, and therefore he needs to stop tweeting rather than be fired.
Yeah, and in an ideal world, that would happen. I think the trouble, playing devil's advocate here, I think the trouble with people like Gary Lineker is they're so highly paid, which is, again, something we need to discuss in another debate, but they're so highly paid that they almost can get away with saying what they want, because it doesn't really matter if they're truly sacked or not. They've got enough money in the bank, they've got enough followers. There's so much power there that I think is the point here. And I'm not saying that I agree with him or agree with the tweets he says. I think some of them are very inflammatory. But I think we need to go back to basics of what is the BBC about? Do we still want to fund it? And how can it be considered impartial in, as I say, this train that is social media, where everybody says is political these days? It's very hard to stop that.
Like it or loathe it. Andrew, Alison, Julie Cook, an interesting debate. Thank you both for joining in and giving us your take on this story. Let us know at home what you think. Is it a big loss for BBC Wales to lose Carol Vorderman? Was it the right thing for her to say, if you can't zip it, you got to go?
I just sort of think celebrities should keep their mouths shut. Do you know what I mean? Because it's the problem is with, and whether you agree with Carol, for example, or not, or whoever it may be, they shape minds. Well, what do they know about politics or about a situation that you don't? Well, nothing, frankly. And in fact, they tend to be, very well off and all the rest of it, not living a lifestyle as most people in this country are. So I just don't think celebrities should stop saying things about that. Just keep
real
it neutral.
People, celebrities, though. Rishi
That's
Sunak,
true.
incredibly wealthy person. Let us know your thoughts. As always, gbnews@gbnews.com.